Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your hosts, Michael Maleka
and Molly Hudash. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your host, Mike and Molly. Super excited to be here with you guys, especially coming out of our how to review a full length and really just how to review in general, our little mini series, right? Last episode, we talked about cars. And then the previous episode, we talked all about science. We also talked about kind of a broad overview, how to review and learn the most that you could physically from a full length, right? So now that we've kind of been talking about review, we've been talking about full lengths, the next logical step is to talk about how do you know when you're ready to test? Maybe like Mike, you've got a couple, 11 full lengths under your belt. How do I know when I'm ready to test? Mike, I'm super excited to talk to you about this because I know you had a lot of data collection with all of those exams, right? How did you know when you were ready to test?
It was super there was so much uncertainty. Like, I want to be completely honest. Like, this was again almost 5 years ago now. I remember I was doing these exams. I had hit a plateau. It was like a month and a half out. And I was so up in my head. I was like, should I take it? Should I not? And it was honestly from when I had to really be honest and actually really reflect. It was very much like a personal endeavor where I had to reflect and think, what's stopping me? What was the thing that's holding me back? And really reviewing my exams because there was something up until that point that was not working. And so honestly, if I were to talk to myself from 2020, I'd say, hey, listen to our podcast episode from the other day because it
Oh,
was the problem with my review, to be honest. But then once I started reviewing them while actually targeting the things I was targeting, my score again, I saw that really constant progression in my score, scoring consistently by the end, and that's how I knew. Like, I felt confident going into it. I felt good going into it. And
out of
so mhm.
out of curiosity, you said if you could go back and listen to that podcast episode, were you more on like I needed the granular review advice or I needed the overview, like episode 1 of our mini series?
I
Which one would
think
have helped you more?
I think episode 2 for me, because I think I was pretty good at the big picture stuff, but it was always like I was not actually targeting. Like, a lot of the times I was doing the classic look at the solution, say, oh, okay, I get it, then move on, rather than actually taking it apart.
Yeah.
Why did
Yeah.
I get that question wrong? And so if you're listening to this, anyone at home, and you're like, well, what is he talking about? Go back and
Go
watch the
watch it.
episode. I
Go watch the
cannot
episode.
recommend enough because again, I would recommend that to me, honestly, before. And so it really became from that reflection and the review. And I know, Molly, you were like, super different. You were like, you had never doubted it for a second. Talk to me about that.
Well, okay. So as we've discussed in a previous episode, I only had 5 exams. I had the sample test, and then I had the 4 AMC that were out at the time, right? We didn't have the free practice. That's a very new resource. And I did take a third party at some point, but I took a third party and then I took the sample test,
Hmm.
and my score changed. I got like 5 points higher on the sample than the third party, and I looked into it, and a lot of the third party exams that are part of a company that have a score guarantee, they actually have a incentive to deflate your score, because if they have you scoring low on their diagnostic exam, you're more likely to get that score increase that they're guaranteeing you. So I was very quickly like, okay, cool, not going to do any more of that.
Out.
Um,
Right.
I'm going to trust my sample test. I'm going to study a bunch and then take my 4 and hope that things are going well. And so I studied obviously very hard. I worked on my content, and then I also did all the AMC questions. So I
Hmm.
got a lot of practice in the question packs and the section bank and all that good stuff. And I definitely saw score improvements there, and I reviewed them very thoroughly. I felt like I was learning, and I felt like I was getting ready. And then when I did start my full lengths, I did notice that it was a pretty stepwise improvement, right? Because I had so much practice under my belt, right? My first score was a little bit of an improvement, like about 5 points from my
Oh, just a little bit.
diagnostic.
Just 5 points. Right.
Well, I mean, like separated by months of studying,
Sure, sure,
like
sure.
2 months
Yeah,
apart.
yeah,
So, so a lot of people expect a huge
yeah.
difference
Mhm.
at the
Right.
end of their content phase or their practice phase.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's not the case.
Mhm.
We hope for like 10 points and sometimes it's not 10 points.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's 0 points, right? But I saw a little improvement from the review and the practice I was doing. And then every time I did a test, it was rather than like this entire new experience, it was mostly like, oh, okay. Like I did all this practice. Now I just have to make sure I can focus for so long and fine tune my timing. I saw a pretty nice stepwise improvement. And then the last two tests I took were pretty consistent with how I wanted to be scoring.
Mhm.
So I had a pretty stepwise path, which
Pretty
is very uncommon. It's very
very
uncommon.
uncommon. Let's make that very clear. Very, very uncommon for anyone out there. And yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm glad because we're talking about this because this is probably one of like the most common questions I get asked. Like,
Yeah.
I should I postpone my exam? Actually, I think I had this conversation today,
Oh,
earlier today. I had a
yeah.
student reach out and say, "Hey, like I think she was a young lady from our live online course. She's like, "Hey,
Mhm.
Mike, I want to chat." She's like, "Hey, this thing happened, right? Do I postpone my exam? Do I not postpone my exam? Am I ready?" So this is something again just today, but we get this question on all the time. I'm sure in the office hours, Molly, you get this
Oh, yeah.
question all the
Yes.
time. And so
Yeah.
I'm glad we can answer some of the most commonly talk about some of the most commonly things that we see, and then hopefully give a little bit of direction for anyone listening.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah. Just recently, over the past couple months, I started teaching general office hours for our course students so
Hmm.
that students have a place to go if they have questions about anything that's not specifically like a car strategy or like a science content or a science question. Like, this is a place where you could go for like when should I take exams if this is or when should I take a practice exam when I'm trying to test on this date? Or Molly, my score is plateauing. What should I do? Or how can I fine tune this approach? Or how do I integrate studying for my personal or my MCAT with my personal statement? Things like that. And honestly, over the past couple weeks, especially, I've answered or helped coach students through the how to or should I postpone question probably 10, 15 times,
Yeah.
right? Like it's a conversation that we on the MCAT instruction side and tutoring
Hmm.
side have all the time, but it's also such a unique situation if this is you, right? You
Hmm.
don't have a lot of like, classmates and
Experience with
friends
it.
in many cases that are dealing with this. Yeah, and you don't
Mhm.
have any experience. So I'm really glad that we could do an episode like this and talk about how you know when you're ready and how to tell when you're not ready. And
Mhm.
therefore, putting these together, should I take the test on the date that I've picked? Or
Mhm.
if you haven't picked one, when should I test? Right.
Mhm.
So let's start out with what are some signs that from the students you've worked with are
Mhm.
like immediate red flags? You are not ready.
Mhm. Mhm. I think first red flag, full length scores. That's usually the first thing that I look at, like, how are your full length scores? Because a first conversation that we have is, what do you want on your exam? Because everyone has their own different goals, all different where they want to go. But then we look at your full length scores. A lot of the times I see falling scores that are all over the place. Like they get up to a 515, then down to a 505, then down to a 5, then up to a 510. Oh, but then this was actually a third party exam. Oh, then we switched to this one. And there's no like consistency, right?
Yeah.
That kind of scares me a little bit for test day because if we're not seeing this consistency, there's so many questions about our review process. There's so many questions
Yeah.
about areas of growth that maybe we are or aren't targeting. So that's probably the first red flag. If you've got inconsistent full length scores, that'd probably be the first flag to start thinking about, am I ready or am I not ready?
Yeah, I totally agree, especially because, like, why?
Hmm.
Why are your scores so inconsistent? What are you doing in the 515 that you're not doing in the 505? Like, what? Like,
Hmm.
that's a very large difference. And especially when we have scores that kind of roller coaster up and down, we really need to figure out what's going on. And I like that you bring up the third party thing with
Hmm.
inconsistent fulling scores because if you are jumping around between different third party and AMC resources, like we talked about, sometimes different, especially third parties will inflate or deflate or they just will or won't be accurate to what your test day experience is, right? So I put the most stock in your AMC exam scores, right?
Hmm.
Can we get those to be consistent? And oftentimes it's not. And what I find is one of the most common reasons why scores are so up and down um, is because students have no time management skills. And so it's
Mm,
like if it just so happens that they have easier passages at the beginning or easier for them, um, and maybe their tougher passages are at the end. So they move through the easier ones more effectively. They get to the harder ones, but they realize that they're low on time. So they have to move through them quickly. They can maybe score a little higher. Um, rather than like if they come out of the gate with a really hard one and they spend 20 minutes on a passage and then realize, oh my God, and then the score can tank.
spirals it. Hmm.
Yeah. If you have no time management skills, or if you realize that mentally you you run out of gas halfway through your test, that's a sign to me we're not ready yet. Because
Hmm.
the problem is if we don't have time management skills, you're not giving yourself your full chance to actually score how you
Hmm.
could score. Right?
Hmm.
If you are gassed out, you're obviously not going to be able to perform well. Maybe you know the right answer. And if you
Hmm.
had the mental energy, you could totally get it right, but it's just we're not used to the pace and the endurance of this test yet. So you can't perform at your own peak.
Mhm. I hear all the time, like students, because I hear this all the time, like, okay, I kind of clocked out a little bit this exam, or okay, in the last few, I didn't really focus in, but somehow we have this belief that on test day we'll just lock in more than any
Oh
other
my
day.
gosh,
Like it's
stop.
like, oh, the last few exams I wasn't at my best, but test day though, that's coming up. It's different. I'm just gonna lock in, and I won't be nearly as unfocused as I am these previous ones. I can promise you, anyone who's ever said that I've worked with never locked in. They never locked in on test day.
Could
Like I
we
can
could we
promise you
just
that.
talk about optimal arousal theory real quick?
Right? Like it's like if what's happening on the previous exams? Like, are you too stressed? Are you not stressed enough? Like on test day, if you weren't optimizing your arousal, you're probably either going to be either way too relaxed or way too stressed,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So
Test,
I
yeah. Test day is going to stress you out so much more than a practice test just by nature of the fact that this is the real thing, right? If you are already so overwhelmed and overstimulated with a full length, you have to recognize that you're not going to be calm and locked in on your real test. If anything,
Mhm,
you might be a little bit less comfortable because,
mhm,
again, you have the pressure of this as the actual test day.
mhm.
We could talk about different ways to kind of unpack that and get yourself ready for test day. It's actually something that we may talk about in a
Sooner
upcoming
rather than later.
episode,
Hmm.
right? But don't expect the real test experience to be like, oh, this will be way easier to stay focused than my full lengths,
Hmm.
right?
Right. And this is kind of coming back to even what we were saying about how test day should be like any other exam, right? These
Mhm.
practice exams should simulate test day to a T.
Yes.
If you're doing something during these practice exams, like not locking in, or maybe you're too stressed, probably on test day, it's probably gonna
Yep.
be the same. So
Exactly.
yeah, normally I've heard it way too much, like, oh, I'm gonna hope on test day, or this on test day that something X different, big red flag that you are not ready for test day.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, if you expect test day will go exactly as your practice tests have been, and that makes you nervous, that's a sign.
Yeah, that's a sign
You
that
know,
maybe we're
if
not ready.
if you show up exactly how you did with your last practice exam and you wouldn't be happy with your performance, you may benefit from more time, right?
Sure.
Um, Another thing that I see with students is major content gaps, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, like we've talked about, you do not need to be a walking encyclopedia in order to succeed on the test. Of course not.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're trying to review an exam and you're really struggling because you don't have the foundational content that you need to unpack what is strategy versus what is content, there's so much more that you could do if you took some time and addressed that, right? Really significant content gaps, like you haven't even seen certain topics since undergrad, like I just haven't had a time to look at them, or maybe I spent some time, but not enough. Especially when it impedes your review. To me, that's something that would be a red flag. Again, you don't have to know everything, but you have to know enough to get everything out of that review. And if we don't, more time.
Mm-hmm.
We need more
Right.
time.
Right. Yeah, no, I've spoken with students who are like leading up to their exam. They want to chat for some advice. And then I asked them, I think this was a specific one. I think this was like a month ago. I asked them, okay, what's SDS page? and they had no idea. And I was
Mm,
like, okay, some things it's okay if you don't know these niche things, but something as like an analytical technique, like probably, arguably, maybe you have a different opinion, one of the most important analytical techniques on this exam. Like, if you
mhm.
don't know at all what that is, like,
Yeah,
imagine
you've
what
never heard
else.
of it.
You've never
Yeah.
even heard of it.
Yeah.
Then there's so much that there's likely so much more that we're likely missing.
Yeah.
That like we might just not be ready for that exam. And it's a hard conversation to have, but one that's real. Because again, we want to be real, right? So
Yeah.
large content gaps, huge, huge red flag. But
Yeah.
also, right, what else is a huge red flag is if you haven't even completed all of the AMC gold material, right? Like
Or
we were
platinum.
talking
I
about.
think we called it platinum
Oh,
material.
oh yeah, we called it platinum, but like the gold and platinum. Like I
The
think
gold
both
and the
of
platinum.
those, the
Yeah.
gold and the platinum. Yeah. If you don't know what we're talking about, this was I think what was this
Previous episode.
episode four of the Mike and
Yes.
Molly. Yeah.
Yes.
So then we talk about the AMC resources. Not all AMC resources are made the same. They are
Yes.
not all equal. And if you're listening and you're like, oh, I want to know which AMC resources are the most valuable, go and
Go
watch
check
that
it out.
episode. Because if a student comes to me and they're like, yeah, Mike, I've taken three of the AMC exams and my test is next week, and I'm like,
Where are the other ones?
where are the other ones? Why did we not do that? Right? I'm like, there's so much value in those exams that if we don't extract, again, we're all about extracting all the gold, all the value from those. If you are not even exposing yourself to them, there's
Mm.
so much left on the table. Especially, I mean, we've talked about the example, even the section banks as well.
Section
Section
banks.
bank, volume one, volume two, so much value in those that if we
Yeah.
haven't even completed them, like, and it's not just about doing them, but like reviewing them well. I'm
Mhm.
like, hey, like there's probably something left on the table that I would not want you to take this exam if you haven't even extracted all that info.
Yes. And I would put at least one of the cars resources on there too, because
Hmm.
sometimes I think, especially if cars is a scary thing for us, sometimes we get very landlocked in the sciences and we're like, oh, I'm just going to focus on the sciences. Keep in mind, cars is the highest yield thing on the MCAT, right? 53 questions out of the 230. That's higher than any other science subject, right? It is the highest yield thing on the MCAT. So make sure, I would say, you also are doing at least one full cars resource, the cars question pack 1 or 2, or the diagnostic tool, especially because you're getting, is it 600 questions between section bank 1 and 2? I
Oh
think
my
it's
goodness.
300 each.
For the section banks, oh my goodness. Yeah, I
They're
think 300
300
each.
each.
300
Yeah. Oh
each.
my
Yeah, yeah.
goodness. See, so like you're getting 600 science questions. You need to be at least getting, 100, of cars, right? It's pretty
Hmm.
important.
Great
Um,
information.
but yes, I think there's a lot that we could talk about with that. And if you are trying to figure out, am I ready or not, especially as it relates to content gaps, right? Take the diagnostic that we have on our homepage, right? That's, if you haven't taken it already, that's a great way to figure out wherever I'm scoring now, how much of that is content, right?
Mhm.
So we have a free multiple choice exam on our website that's all no passages, exclusively multiple choice content questions that's designed to parallel the AMC outline. If there are significant content gaps, they will show up in that diagnostic exam. And then you'll get the detailed analytics page. All of this is free, by the way. That will show you exactly where your content gaps are. If you are stuck, right, if your score is super stagnant or super inconsistent, highly recommend you do that just to eliminate a variable, right? If you do very well on that content diagnostic, but your score is all over the place or it's too low, okay, cool. This is probably not a content issue, strategy issue, right?
Great,
We
great
have the
signal. Great direction.
yes, at least now you know. And again,
Hmm.
maybe it comes back and you've got content gaps all over the place. It's like, okay, well, at least now we know what we need to review, right?
Hmm.
It's it's better to know.
Hmm.
It's
Knowledge
uncomfortable.
is power. Knowledge is power,
Knowledge is
truly,
power.
when it comes to this. Yeah.
It truly is, right? And we need to figure out if we're not ready, how can we get you ready?
Hmm.
Right? Because obviously, it doesn't feel great to accept that I'm not ready at the moment, but the goal is if we're not ready, we need to figure out why so that we know what to do to actually get ready.
Hmm.
Right? So now that we've covered like how to know if you're not ready, let's talk about how to know that you are ready.
Hmm.
What do
Hmm.
you think?
I think my biggest thing that I'm looking for personally in a student is what do they think? Like, do you actually feel ready? I think that's probably one of the most important things is that
Yeah.
personal confidence. Because I have seen so many students who know their stuff, who know the strategies, but the problem is the confidence. Like, they're so in their heads, like, oh, I don't know everything. Oh, I don't know every single detail on this exam. Oh, I am not ready, even though there's every sign to show them that they are. I think that personal reflection piece is probably one of the first things. Do you actually feel ready? Right? Because I think that's like a prerequisite to being ready for this exam.
I like that. Because it's kind of like the reverse of everything that we said. If you had consistent scores, if you know that you don't have major content gaps, if you are managing your time right, right? The reverse of everything that we said kind of applies. You have completed the AMC Platinum and Gold material. But I love that you bring this up because there's this other, right? This intangible factor that no one really considers, and that is your thoughts on whether you're ready,
Hmm.
right? Because if you don't think you're ready, even if you are, you won't score how you want to,
You will
right? This
not.
is such a mental exam, right? It's testing your resilience and your growth mindset so thoroughly that if you don't believe it, you will not get the score that you want,
Mhm.
right?
Even if
You
you have
have
all the content, right?
Yes, you could
Mhm.
have everything at your fingertips, but if you let the self-doubt in, you will not get the score that you want. So I
Mhm.
love that. That's kind of a red flag if you
In
don't think
reverse.
you're ready, that's saying something.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to mention that getting over that barrier, if you
Mhm.
really do have all the green flags as far as the objective measures, it's going to take reflection and some positive self-talk to get past that.
Mhm.
I know you were saying, Mike, that you had kind of a similar experience of like, I can see that maybe I'm getting better, but I didn't feel ready and I had to or you had to self-reflect. What was that process like for you? How did you get over that hump
Mhm. Mhm.
to a point where
It,
you were actually ready?
I remember it first started with me screaming into a pillow. That's how it
I
started.
remember you telling me that.
Like I remember like being so frustrated because I had worked so hard. I hit this plateau. I remember getting so frustrated, screaming into a pillow, but then realizing I need to change. But then my score started going up. But then again, the self-doubt came in when I had the higher scores, like, am I truly ready? Like I was even thinking like, okay, again, as a Canadian, I was taking it in August, like, okay, if I don't do well, I'm going to, oh, I'll test in the winter. Oh, do they even have tests in the winter? Oh, maybe in January, right? All these thoughts were going through my head. But it wasn't until I talked to a mentor of mine. I talked to somebody else and I said, hey, like, this is the scenario. Like, I need some advice. And I remember them saying, hey, you're telling me you're on an upward trend score wise, right? You were able to, they asked me a few questions and I answered them well. I had a consistent timeline. I was taking full length exams and they were like, and you're saying that you're not ready, right? It was it's kind of somebody else kind of talking back to me because I had all this negative self talk in my mind that somebody else talking to me was huge. Like sometimes I just realized like, oh, maybe I can do this. And then I had that mentality also fed back really well because I was scoring even better than I was. I think my plateau that I was mentioning before was I was like hovering between a 505 and a 510, which for many is a good score. But I was shooting for I wanted that 520 plus. I wanted that. And I remember like I had scored okay, so once I started reviewing well, I was scoring in the 512, 515, but I remember then once I actually talked to this person, like after I started like thinking, okay, wait, I can do this. 520, 521, 518, okay, 522, right? And then again, these are a lot of exams that I took, and then test day at 525.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's so special that you had someone like that in your life that can kind of talk some sense into you, right? I love that's one of my favorite parts of doing the general office hours that I was mentioning, right? Like I have those conversations of should I postpone all the time? And sometimes it's like, you got it, right?
Oh,
One of the
right.
questions that I like to ask students when I, kind of attempt to be a resource like that for them is let's assume, let's just say you got 2 extra weeks, 3 extra weeks. What would you do in those 2 or 3 extra weeks that would make you ready? And
Hmm.
for the students that are like, oh, well, if I had 2 or 3 extra weeks, I could finish the AMC exams and I would finish the section bank. I'm like, okay, yeah, postpone your test.
Amazing.
Right? Like
Great.
if you can give me a concrete answer, like this is what I would do just because I'm running out of time, cool. Yeah, you could probably benefit from that. But so often, the students who are actually ready, I ask them that and I hear silence for a little while. And they're like, well, I would just, I'd learn more, I'd get more practice. And I'm like, but what would you practice? Like
Hmm.
what specific like what would you do? You have
Hmm.
extra time. What are you going to do differently? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, well, that that in
Well,
itself could
fine.
show
Yeah.
that yeah, you are doing everything that you can. Or sometimes they'll say like I'll find an extra third party, I'll do this. I'm like, you have every indicator that that's not necessary.
Hmm.
Right? But I think sometimes it's sitting yourself down and saying like, if I'm debating, should I give myself more time or not? What would you do with it? You
Hmm.
have a magic wand. You have 4 extra weeks, 3 extra weeks. What are you going to do? Right?
Hmm.
Is there a reason that you need that extra time, or is it to make yourself feel better?
Hmm.
Right? Because sometimes we want it just to push the deadline along.
Hmm.
But I think it's also important to recognize that if we truly are ready and then we wait an extra month, you are perfectly geared and trained to take it now. Like you've built your endurance skills, those can deteriorate,
Hmm.
right? Like if you've been doing an exam a week and you've gotten into this rhythm and you know exactly like your time management, it's muscle memory, and then you say, you know what? No, I'm not going to take it right now.
Hmm.
And then you wait a month and you
Hmm.
don't take exams between and then and now, test
Hmm.
day is going to hit you like a train, right?
Yeah.
Like you also have to think of your momentum.
I
If
was
you
literally just thinking about that word. Like you are literally saying
it's
moment.
your
That was the
momentum.
word in my mind. It's all about momentum here.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it
And
is.
I think it was that big thing where that deterioration, right? If you and I think there's something to be said about if you delayed it, that urgency that you had, that sincerity that you had about I've got to be working hard right now, it dies down a little bit. It's kind of that feeling. I know when I was like in school, I was an undergrad, I was always a last minute procrastinator. That was me. And whenever there was this deadline, I'm like working hard towards the deadline, right? I'm like
Hmm.
2, 3 days out, I'm working towards the deadline. And then if the deadline gets pushed a week, they said, hey, some students complained, I'll give an extra week. I'm like, great.
Cool. I have a week to
My
sit on
hands
my
go
hands.
up and I end up don't not doing anything until 2 or 3 days before. Now I have the exact same amount of time I had in the first place.
Yeah.
I see this in so many students who push their exams back where they were on the rolls, they were doing the great things, they were reviewing well. There was a little bit of urgency. Again, optimal arousal theory is coming back. There was a little bit of stress, which is okay. It's good. It's healthy.
It
But
actually
then,
optimizes your performance.
right? But then when we pushed it back, our arousal went down a little bit. We started getting a little too relaxed, right? And so that little bit of a stress, a little bit of a fire can actually be extremely helpful for this. Actually, pushing can actually be a deterioration for your score.
Yes, I totally agree. And again, the question is if if you know exactly what you need to do and you just need more time to do it, you're not going to lose that momentum because you already have a path and a direction of like, this is exactly what I need. You're carrying that momentum forward. In some cases, again, it is the right call to postpone. But if you are already, picture like a snowball rolling down the hill. If you've already gained speed, right? And
Totally.
especially to give you a specific thing to look for, if you're not making the same mistake again and again and again and again,
Oh.
if you recognize that I've made a mistake, but now I'm growing for it, I've made a mistake and I'm growing for it, I'm growing and I'm growing and I'm growing, and you're improving your time management. If you're doing this, if you're on that upward trend, have some confidence and think about how far you've come, right? Because I think that is the biggest thing. If you truly have all these green flags, but you're still like, I just want more time, I just don't know, think about where you started. And I don't just mean your scores, right?
Mhm.
I don't mean your scores. There's a million reasons why you could miss a question. And if your score jumped 10 points, 15 points, you have learned
Mhm.
so much between content and strategy and endurance and timing. Like it is night and day, right? You have worked so hard and you've learned so much from your mistakes. You've probably grown a lot as a person, right?
Mhm.
I think the beauty sometimes is in recognizing how much work you've put in, how much growth you've grown,
Mhm.
or how much growth you've made over the past X amount of months, and realizing that test day is really just a chance to show up and demonstrate what you've learned, right? It's not this big, scary mountain you have to climb. You've already climbed the mountain. You've already
Like
done
maybe
it. You've
11
already
times,
done
you know?
all the work. All you
Hmm.
have to do is take a picture at the top of the mountain, right? It's to
Hmm.
prove to yourself that you've already covered all this ground,
Hmm.
right? It shouldn't be this behemoth on its own. You've already put in all the work.
Hmm.
Again, if you know I have X, Y things that I really need to do, you're not at the top of that mountain. I get it. In some cases, it really is important to postpone. But if you have been doing all the right things, schedule your test. Or
Hmm.
really, hopefully you've already scheduled your test.
Hmm. Hmm. And
I
then,
know we were talking about that earlier.
mhm.
When do you think a student should schedule their test?
Oh, oh my goodness. I think this is a whole conversation, but I think as soon as they can, to be honest, like as soon as humanly possible. I know there are
A couple months out.
there are release dates. Like I know for the earliest you can book like a January exam, I believe is in like October, November, December. I can't remember the dates right, but as soon as the dates that you want to test in open, you should be testing them out. It should not be a month or 2 months out before you choose a test date. As I think I scheduled my August test date in, I think it was like March or even maybe even January that year because I wanted to make sure I got the test date as soon as I could. Again, maybe my dates are off, but as soon as humanly possible, schedule a date. Get a date down.
Yes. Yes. And if you
Mhm.
haven't scheduled a date, even if you're hearing this podcast and you're like, ooh, I've got red flags galore, I definitely need more time. If you don't have a date on the books, think back to what Mike was saying about the sense of urgency of having a deadline. Even if you think, I'm going to take my test in June or July or August or September, right? Book a date now.
Mhm.
If it's more than 60 days, you can move things around with very limited like fees. As you get closer to test day, though, it is going to be more expensive to reschedule. Pay attention
Mhm.
to those deadlines because I think it goes from like $50 to reschedule to 100 to 200
Mhm.
dollar fees to reschedule. So keep that in mind. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So get a test date on the books, put those deadlines in your calendar, and use those as times to reflect, am I on the right track? Might I need to reschedule? But if you're listening to this and you're like, I've got all the green flags, I should test soon, and you don't have a test date, pause the podcast and look right now.
Go, yeah, you can pause it again,
Please,
continue later, please.
please continue later. Yes, I wouldn't normally say pause, right? Or put us on in the background, but
Yeah.
like personally, and I don't remember if you had to do this too, but personally, I had to travel like 3 or 4 hours to go and take my test.
Mhm.
I live in Southern California. There are a lot of universities around, and a lot of people taking the MCAT. There's a lot of test centers too, but it was booked. I
Mhm.
had to go all the way up into Central California and drive hours and hours away. I stayed at an Airbnb the day before my test. Um, Not an optimal situation, but it was the closest test date that I could get. So please don't be like me. I mean, I think I signed up in maybe January or February.
For an April
Um,
test date, right?
yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, which to be fair is late. I
Mhm.
pulled up the dates for 2025 exams for January to June of this year, so in this section of the year that we are in at the moment. If you're
Mhm.
listening in the future, very cool.
Very cool.
um, but those test dates became available in October of 2024.
Mhm.
So you've got months technically. It wasn't helpful for me because I didn't sign up early, but
Well, Molly didn't have this podcast, you know?
that's true. That's true.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then July to September dates open up in February. So they're
Mhm.
open now. If you're taking your test later in the year, book it now, right?
Mhm.
See as close as you can get to your location. Traveling wasn't fun, I'll tell you that, but get a test date on the books.
Hmm.
because you don't want to be ready and have all this momentum and realize I'm ready. I got all the green flags. Put me in coach, right? I'm ready to get my 528 and then
Hmm.
realize that you can't even get a test date for 2 months. That's the worst case scenario because
Hmm.
you're so ready.
And it's
Um,
the worst if that's the limiting factor, right?
yeah, that breaks my heart more than anything else, probably.
But you're like, oh, you're ready and you have
Like,
everything
you're
because.
ready now.
Hmm. Hmm.
Somebody cancel, please.
Yeah, no, but too many, I think, yeah, too many hope that, oh, or just by like, oh, a month out, I'll have a test date.
Yeah, someone will
Yeah,
drop out.
but I have seen it where it
Yeah,
doesn't, right? So
yeah,
get one on the books. I mean, I got
on the
lucky.
books.
I got lucky where the second mine opened, I was ready to go. I was in the 2020 year. And so that was the COVID year where all these test dates were booked. I remember
Oh,
getting a
yeah.
spot even on the opening day was tough. Even on the again, this was for an August exam. It was like, yeah, February or March when it opened. And I remember like waiting for like 4 or 5 hours just to get a test date on that day. Yeah, again, like
Ooh.
7 months out. And so again, the test date that I actually booked originally, I changed it because it was like an hour and a half out. That was all that was left. I was on a whole bunch of waiting lists. A month or two later, another one opened up and I switched it as fast as I could. But it's
Nice.
because I had that time. I did it that far in advance. So make sure you do it that far. You do it at least a few months out. Like more than just a few, but as far as you can. Mhm.
Yeah, and like you said, it's not impossible if you do book somewhere and you want to, if a spot opens up that's closer, you could always switch, right? It's worth it. Get one on
Mhm.
the calendar. And if you have one on the calendar and you're not sure if you should postpone, right? I feel like we should just quickly recap. Like if you have a test date already, which again,
Mhm.
if you don't, go find one right now, please.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, let's say you have one and you've decided I need to postpone,
Mhm.
right? I need to postpone. How far out should I postpone? Um, and again, just how should I know, right? If we're going to recap, I think if you are within a month of your test date, again, the 30-day deadline is, I think it's $100 fee.
Mhm.
I'll make sure. If you do it within 30 days, it's more expensive than that to
Uh-huh.
reschedule. You really want to
Mhm.
make sure you are reflecting on should I postpone or not more than 30 days out. But
Mhm.
I would say to give you a specific benchmark, if you
Mhm.
are more than 10 points out from your goal score at that 30-day mark, it's and if
Probably.
you are set on that goal score, not
Hmm.
like as long as I get X, I'll be happy. Like, if you are like, I need a 528 and you're scoring a 518, that's a wonderful score, But
Great
if
score. I'd be
like
happy with it.
I will not be happy unless I get X score and you're more than 10 points away from that, 30
A
days
month
out,
out. Hmm.
push your test.
Hmm.
Okay. If you need that score and you're 10 points away from what you need, push your score.
Hmm. Hmm. So this is, I think, really important, especially if you have a target school you want to go to and you need to make some cutoff. I think that's a big thing. I mean, this is an American thing, but I know that's a big thing. Or maybe there's a
Mhm.
cutoff for a Canadian school. Like Canadian schools have cutoffs as well. If you are not within 10 points of that score. So say you need a 515, which a few schools actually need a 515, and you are scoring in like the 490s a month out. Again, we always hope for like miracles to happen. Like, hey, it can jump. And again, I have seen these things, but they're so uncommon, right? And again, to hope for these things is usually again not the greatest plan. Rather, if we can push it and we need that score, it sometimes is better to push it.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. And I did pull open the values at the
Mhm.
time that this podcast was recorded. It actually was what I thought. If it's 60 days or more, it's
Mhm.
$50 to either change the date or test center. If
Mhm.
it's between 30 and 60 days, it's $100 reschedule fee. And if it's within 30 days, it's $200,
Mhm. And there's
right?
also like a time where you can't even reschedule at all, right?
Yeah, it's within 10 days of your exam.
Mhm.
You can
Yeah.
only cancel,
Mhm.
which is no fun because it's expensive. Yeah, I don't think you get
Nice.
anything back.
Yeah, you get nothing, man. You just cancel and you have to go through the whole scheduling process again.
Yes. So make
And
sure
so,
you have your deadlines in your calendar to reflect,
mhm.
because if you decide on day 29, it's $200 instead of 100.
Yeah.
You
Very
don't want
expensive.
this to
One
be an
extra
expensive
day.
process. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I mean, costs are, I think we should talk about costs another day. Like that's something,
Yeah.
there's so many
Yeah, we
costs
should.
associated with this whole process. I think breaking it down might be
And
actually really, really
hidden
helpful.
costs too.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
I think that would be
What
good.
else is a good indicator, you think, Molly? Like of like knowing when to postpone? Like if say they're okay, maybe say they're in within 10 points, but maybe there's
Mhm.
some other factors that are involved. What do you think what might impact that?
Um, I think if you are within 10 points and you're feeling really good, you've got a lot of good momentum, and if you have the time and flexibility, right? And this has happened a handful of times with students that I've worked with that they set a goal score of like, I want a 505. As
Hmm.
long as I get a 505, I'm happy. And they're starting to pick up speed. They're starting to really learn. And they're like, oh, I'm getting pretty close actually. Like, I wonder now that I'm learning so much and I know how to study and I know how to review, like if I had an extra month, maybe I could do a 510 or a 515. Like I think I could go a lot further than what I was hoping for myself because I feel like I've broken down a lot of the barriers that were holding me back before. Like if I had a little extra time, I think I could go further. If you have that mentality of like, I'm demonstrating to myself that I'm improving, and maybe you're within the green flag criteria for your original goal score, but you think maybe I could
Makes you
go
go more,
further.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, maybe I could go further. And if you have the time and flexibility in your schedule to do so, I think it's a great idea, right?
Hmm.
And to give you guys a benchmark, which I often bring up in these conversations in general office hours, if you test any time before the end of May, your application will not be postponed, right? You will not have any sort of delays. This
Hmm.
is the situation, right? You need, ideally, right? You'd love to have your score in hand before you send off your application to individual schools. That being said, if you can submit your primary application on day one, which is May 28th of 2025, for this application cycle, if you can get your application in, and let's say you take your test on May 25th or some date before that, I think it's like the 20th or something like that. You can take your test before, you'll get your test back about a month after, right? Recognize that it takes AM or AMCAS a month to verify your application. You could submit on May 28th one school, like one safety school. And as long as you select at least one school, AMCAS will verify or begin the process of verifying your app. As long as you have your score back by basically June 28th, which is the earliest possible date to be verified, you have no delay. If you have your score in hand by June 28th and your application is verified on June 28th, you have your score and sit down. Okay, of the 20 schools I was considering, I'm deciding I'm going to prioritize these 10. Go on to AMCAS. You could select those 10, and immediately, because your application is already verified, that application will be sent to all 10 schools. There's
Hmm.
no, you don't have to wait 4 weeks additional, right?
Hmm.
You only get verified once. So
Hmm.
submit your primary app on May 28th. You'll take a month for them to verify it, and you can add 10, 20 more schools on June 28th or whenever your application is verified with no extra delay. Okay, so if you're in that like very strong momentum, you're like, I could go further. Maybe my test date is in April, but I think if I had until May, I could score even higher. There's not really a huge reason why you can't postpone until May, as long as you get your application in still on the 28th.
Hmm.
That's for American schools, but I know, Mike,
Canada.
we were talking Canada's totally different. So let's say we have Canadian listeners. What would you advise in that situation?
So in Canada, it's a little bit different because in the American application process, it's a rolling application, starts May 28th, and the date in which you submit actually matters. And so if you submit on May 28th, it impacts your application versus if you submit June 8th. In Canada, however, there is just one deadline, October 1st, every single year. As long as you get your application submitted by October 1st, that's it. And so this is a little bit different because usually the last MCAT dates anyway are in early September. And so a lot of the times people will get their scores back. However, once it's submitted on October 1st, that's the deadline. There's nothing after that. You can't go back and change and submit a future MCAT score. That's it.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
that's where a lot of the times people test in August. Again, early September if you know you're going to get your test back before October 1st. Again, I think there's only one or two that actually you get your score back after that date. But I think that's made intentionally so that there shouldn't even be a reason to
Yeah,
have to be in that position. And so a little bit different in Canada for those ranges.
gotcha.
Mhm,
Yeah, I'm glad that we have an American and a Canadian
mhm,
perspective because those are probably the majority of our audience. If you are
mhm,
listening and you're applying to a different program in another country,
mhm.
let us know in the comments. Super
Yeah.
curious.
Mhm,
I know just even from our course students, we have a huge variety. Like I have a
mhm,
couple students in India and China, all over the place, actually. It's really
mhm,
fascinating.
mhm,
Lots from Canada, lots from America, but if you're listening from another country, we'd love to know.
mhm,
We love, kind of seeing the scope of our Jack Weston family. So definitely let us know in the comments if you are. And I also just want to acknowledge the fact that this applying to medical school and taking the MCAT is such a personal journey, such a personal situation. Again, we could be all over the globe. We could be all different ages, all different backgrounds. We could be dealing with all different GPAs and stats and, access to particular resources. It is a very personal decision what we're discussing, which is, am I ready to take my test? Should I postpone my test? There are so many variables. We've done our best to kind of give you an overview of like this is how you can recognize things in yourself that should point you in one direction or another. But I also, especially in the spirit of free resources, really want to highlight academic advising, right?
mhm,
So, one of the free things that we offer on our website is the opportunity to meet with an advisor, right? We have advisors here that are very well versed in the pre-med application process and also in MCAT. And they have these conversations all the time, right? Their job is to be here and to be a resource to help you make a game plan and figure out, am I ready? Am I not? If I'm not, what should I do? Do I need other resources? What is going to get me ready, right? I've heard so many phenomenal things from students who have gone through the advising process and realized I am ready and I just needed a little push,
mhm,
or maybe I'm not ready, but now I know what I need to do, right? If you're hearing this and thinking, I just I need to sit down with someone. Or
mhm,
Mike, I know you were saying how helpful it was to sit down with your
mhm,
mentor. If you don't have that, please know that you have access to advising on our website for free, right? It's
mhm,
one of our free resources, one of many, right? You can sit down with someone and have a conversation. Am I ready or am I not ready? And if
mhm,
I'm not, how can I get ready? Right? They're not tutors. They're not going to sit down and, make you a full, oh, you need to take these tests on these days.
mhm,
They're not tutors.
mhm,
However, they are experts in this process in helping students through the process,
mhm,
right? So please, if you go on our homepage, right in the top right corner, there is a phone number or a
mhm,
little thing in a little chat box in the bottom right that you could pop
mhm,
up and type a question. You could call, you could even text the number. It's Get your phone out. It's 415-855 4435. Thank you, Mike, for getting your phone out. Mike's calling him right now. You could call or text. I know a lot of us prefer text. So
mhm,
415-855 4435. Text them, say, hey, I just I want to talk to someone about my pre-med application. Okay.
mhm.
I encourage everyone to try, especially if you're listening to this podcast, trying to figure out where do I stand and what should I do as an individual.
Mhm. I think this also really relates well to what we're going to talk about next episode because advisors can also help, not just in terms of MCAT studying, but also everything else that's going on in this preparation. Because I know I had so much going on when I was preparing for the MCAT. I had hobbies, I had research, I had like academic stuff going on. I wanted to hang out with friends. There was COVID happening, I mean, that was me personally. Like there was all these stuff going on, so it can be really overwhelming to be
Yes.
balancing everything while studying for the MCAT.
Oh, yeah. And I feel like, especially as we get closer to test day, it becomes like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I already have all of these different things going on. How am I supposed to figure out, like, even what my last week should look like, right? And once I'm getting close, like, we also need to be thinking, like, how am I going to integrate working on my application? Maybe you're in the group of, wait a minute, I think I could score a little higher if I had a little extra time. Okay, maybe you take your test in later May, but now you have to be working on your personal statement and your MCAT, right? So over the next couple episodes, we're going to tackle some of these questions, right?
Mhm.
Now that we've covered when to test, our next step is, okay, let's assume test day is right around the corner. What should you be doing in those last 7 days, right? Test day is in exactly 1 week, right? Clock starts now, countdown starts now. What do I do? Right? We'll go through that. We will
Mhm.
also be talking about, right, very, very soon, how to balance, right?
Mhm.
How can I balance my pre-med applications with my test day that's coming up? How can I make sure that I'm working on all these things at once if my test day is later? I'm super excited to talk about these next couple topics. There is so much that we can get into.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for them because I think again, we're just hitting on all the things that we hear the most. So
Yes.
I think a lot of people are going to enjoy these next few ones.
Yeah. And all the
Mhm.
things that I don't know about you, but personally, I wish that I heard someone
Sure.
say.
Sure.
I
Yeah, no.
also took my test during COVID and, it was super isolating and I didn't have
Mhm.
friends that I could chat about with this, right?
Mhm.
So I hope that in this podcast, we can be those friends for you, right? And that you could
Absolutely.
have someone to have these kinds of conversations with. We love being here with you guys. We love being able to hopefully be a resource to you, the resource that we wish we had. Right. So
Mhm.
thank you guys so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. Make sure to tune in next episode for what to do in the days leading up to your test. We'll see
All
you
right. Happy
then.
studying, everyone.
Yeah. Happy studying. Bye.
Bye now.